My stepdaughter called me Wimp-ass dad in front of her friends. The next morning, I kicked her out of my house and cut off her access to my accounts. What followed was something I never saw coming. I'll share the whole story. But first, let me say a quick thank you for your ongoing encouragement. It truly means the world to us. If you appreciate the narratives we bring you, please consider subscribing to this channel. We'd also love it if you left a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. We might feature you in our next story. Today's special mention goes to Sofia Petrova from Chicago. We're so glad you're enjoying our stories. Now, let's get into it. I never set out to be a replacement for anyone. That was a firm rule from day one. When I met Elena, she was already a mother. Her daughter Mia was 12, just old enough to be wary and just young enough to need a stable presence. I wasn't trying to be her father. I never introduced myself that way, never demanded the title, never even hinted at it. All I wanted was to be a steady, reliable person in her life, someone who wouldn't disappear when things got tough. Elena was brilliant, driven, and recovering from a messy divorce. I was in a good place financially, running my own design firm from a quiet house with no children of my own. It could have remained straightforward, but I fell in love with the idea of a family. I chose that path. I chose them. For the first year, Mia would only speak to me when directly addressed. I was met with shrugs, dismissive glances, and one-word answers. Elena insisted it was normal. "She's just guarded," she'd say, patting my arm reassuringly. "She'll warm up." So I gave it time. I drove her to her art classes, sat through her band's noisy garage concerts, and covered all the expenses her biological father was never around for. I didn't resent it. I told myself that respect had to be earned, not demanded, and I truly tried to earn it. When she wanted a space to paint, I converted a spare room into a small art studio for her. When she struggled with her art school application, I hired a professional portfolio consultant. When she was heartbroken over friends who betrayed her, I was the one who sat outside her bedroom door, just waiting in case she wanted to talk. I never intruded. I just wanted to be a constant in a world that had already disappointed her too many times. But nothing I did ever seemed to register. By the time she was 16, it was like living with a resentful roommate who despised me simply for being there. Elena was always ready with an excuse. "Teenage girls are complicated," she'd say. "She doesn't really mean it." But Elena didn't see what I saw. She didn't see how Mia's demeanor would turn icy the moment I entered a room, how she spoke to me as if I were hired help, how she would deliberately leave me out of conversations, plans, and even family photos. I tried to attribute it to youthful immaturity, not to take it personally, but it wore on me. Silently and consistently, it eroded the sense of warmth I once felt in my own home. I remember the night everything came to a head. It was a Friday. Mia had a few friends over from her art school, all of them chic and boisterous, tossing their expensive bags onto my gray linen sofa as if they owned it. Elena was away at a tech conference, leaving me as the sole adult at home. The noise didn't bother me. I was accustomed to it, but a gut feeling told me to keep my distance. I brought out some sparkling water and snacks, as I always did, trying not to be intrusive. "Thanks, Mr. Cohen," one of her friends said politely. I smiled, nodded, and started to leave. Then I heard it, loud enough to stop me in my tracks. "Why does he try so hard? He's not my dad. He's just wimp-ass dad. It's honestly kind of sad." Laughter followed. Not awkward, shocked laughter, but easy, knowing laughter. I stood frozen just around the corner, hidden from view, holding an empty tray like a fool. My hands started to tremble. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, a deep sense of emptiness. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual cruelty. It was how she must have always referred to me, like I was nothing but a punchline in my own house. A tightness seized my chest, but I forced it down. I set the tray on a counter, walked upstairs, and sat on the edge of my bed in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. I must have stared at the hardwood floor for an hour before my breathing returned to normal. The next morning, she came downstairs as if nothing had happened. Her hair was in a careless topknot, her eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled with detached boredom. She didn't even look up from her screen when she stated, "The Wi-Fi is too slow for my live stream." I looked at her, really saw her. Her face was so familiar, yet she was a complete stranger. "We're out of respect, too," I said quietly. She blinked, looking confused. "What?" I stood up slowly and pushed my chair in. "You have half an hour to pack. You're not welcome in this house anymore." She laughed, an actual scornful laugh. "You've got to be kidding." "I'm not. You can't just throw me out. This is my home." "No," I corrected. "It's mine, and you've made it perfectly clear you don't want me in your life, so I won't be." She stormed away, frantically calling her mother. I could hear Elena's frantic, angry voice through the phone, but I felt nothing. I logged into my online accounts, removed her as an authorized user on my credit card, changed the password to the design software subscriptions I paid for, and updated the codes on the smart locks. Every system I had put in place to support her life, I dismantled in less than 20 minutes. She was still crying and pacing when I informed her that her rideshare was waiting outside. I didn't hug her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even watch as the door closed behind her. That night, I slept with a profound sense of relief, like a man who had just excised a malignant growth from his own body. The kitchen was quiet the next morning, but it was a heavy silence that felt like a damp blanket. I sat alone at the dining table, nursing a lukewarm coffee and watching the steam fade faster than my thoughts could form. I hadn't slept much, not from regret, but from the sheer weight of a decision that was irreversible. Mia had left the previous night amid a storm of tearful protests and accusations, but my resolve hadn't wavered. Her words to her friends replayed in my mind like a relentless mocking chant. Wimp-ass dad. Sad. My chest constricted every time I pictured their smirks, their shared amusement, the way they had dismissed me like a minor inconvenient character. I'd never expected fawning gratitude, but that degree of contempt had carved something out of me. When Mia finally came down that morning, she looked as if she'd just stepped out of a magazine. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, her defiant attitude fully restored. There wasn't a trace of remorse on her face. She wore her arrogance like a designer jacket, buttoned up tight. She glanced at me, then at the untouched breakfast I had prepared out of sheer habit, pancakes, fresh berries, the almond milk she preferred, and let out a barely audible scoff. I should have let it go. I should have ignored it like I had all the other small acts of disrespect. But something inside me broke. I was done ignoring things. I was done pretending to be unaffected while living with someone who resented my very existence. "You can sit," I said, my gaze fixed on my coffee cup, "but you won't be staying." She laughed again. Still on that, I folded my hands on the table and met her eyes directly. "You said what you said, and I'm done pretending I didn't hear it. Tea." She rolled her eyes and leaned nonchalantly against the kitchen island. "It was a joke. God, you're so overly sensitive. No wonder you're not a real father." I didn't react. "Exactly. I'm not your real father, which means I have no obligation to house you, feed you, or finance your lifestyle. You're an adult now, Mia. You made your feelings clear. Now you can live with the consequences." She blinked, the confident facade cracking for a split second before she recovered with a tight, smug smile. "Mom will never stand for this." I stood and grabbed my car keys. "Then she is welcome to find you an alternative place to live. You have 30 minutes. I left the house before I could say something I would truly regret. I drove for a while, with no destination, just trying to get my racing heart under control. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Elena and a few from Mia, which I ignored. Each vibration felt like a new demand, a fresh assault on my patience. I pulled into a quiet neighborhood park, bought a tea I didn't want from a nearby cafe, and sat in my car, staring at nothing. When Elena finally sent a text that simply said, "We need to talk." Now, I drove back, bracing myself. I had anticipated anger. I just hadn't anticipated how fiercely she would fight back. When I walked through the door, they were both there. Mia was on the sofa, scrolling on her phone as if nothing had happened, and Elena was standing in the entryway, arms crossed, looking like a principal about to deliver a lecture. I closed the door behind me and placed my keys on the console table with slow, deliberate care. Elena didn't hesitate. "You had no right," she said, her voice shaking more with emotion than with volume. "She is my daughter. You don't get to just throw her out." I took a deep breath, fighting to remain calm. She disrespected me, not in private, but in front of her friends. She made a mockery of everything I have ever done for her, and you have let this go on for years." "She's a kid," Elena cried. "She's 20, I corrected her, "a grown woman who is fully aware of her actions, and if you think this is about one single comment, you haven't been paying attention at all." Elena stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. From her place on the sofa, Mia smirked and idly spun her phone. That look, so self-satisfied, so completely unconcerned, ignited a fire inside me I thought had long since burned out. I turned back to Elena, making one final attempt to get through to her. "Do you truly not see it? The way she speaks to me, the way she treats me like an inconvenience? I never tried to take her father's place. I just tried to be a decent man in her life, and for that, she has done nothing but throw it back in my face." "She's going through a lot," Elena shouted. "You think her life is perfect? She's been struggling. With her identity, with pressure, with being held accountable," I cut in, "because that's all this is. She has never had to face a real consequence, and now that she finally is, you're treating me like I'm the villain." Mia stood up, her arms crossed defensively. "You act like you're some kind of saint. You bought things. Big deal. That doesn't make you a father." I looked at her, really looked, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just a cold, clear understanding that this person would never see me as anything more than a means to an end. "You're right," I said softly. "I'm not your father, but I was your safety net, and I just cut the rope." Elena rushed forward, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this, Alex. Please, don't let this destroy everything." But it was already destroyed. I gently pulled my arm free and stepped away. "You made your choice the second you let her back in here without an apology. You chose her comfort over my dignity." "So what happens now?" she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Now, I call my lawyer." A stillness fell over the room after I said that. Not silence, but a heavy stillness. The kind that happens when everyone realizes this isn't just an argument. This is the breaking point. Elena blinked rapidly, trying to fight back tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. I had done that too many times, only to be undermined later. Mia sank back onto the couch, suddenly quiet, her confidence finally faltering. I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door. My hands were steady as I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the dresser. It was the most at peace I had felt in years. By the time I came downstairs the next morning, I knew instantly that something was wrong. The house felt too warm, too loud, too full of attention that shouldn't have been there. I heard the unmistakable sound of slippers on the hardwood floor and the low murmur of voices I hadn't expected to hear again. Not so soon, and not like this. When I rounded the corner into the living room, there she was, Mia, curled up on the sofa as if she owned it, a bowl of cereal in her lap and her phone in her hand. No apology, no sheepish look, no sign of remorse. Just a quick flick of her eyes in my direction before she returned to her screen, dismissing me again. And standing right behind her, arms crossed with that practiced look of indignation, was Elena. She looked rested and resolute, as if she had spent the night convincing herself that she was in the right, as if she were prepared for battle. She didn't speak at first, just stared at me as though I were the one who had committed an unforgivable offense. My stomach dropped, but my expression remained neutral. I said nothing. I wanted to hear the justification, the narrative she had clearly chosen to believe, directly from her. Elena cleared her throat and gestured towards the sofa. "She's not going anywhere," she declared, "and you had no right to throw her out." I tilted my head, my voice even. "No right." "That's right," she affirmed, taking a step forward. "She's my daughter. This is her home." "No," I said flatly. "This is my home. I bought it, I maintain it, I pay for everything in it. You moved in when we married, and she came with you. That was our arrangement. But she disrespected me in a way that I will not ignore. And if you're telling me you're fine with that, then you are part of the problem." Elena's mouth fell open as if to offer a rebuttal, but no words came out. Just a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or the dawning realization that I was no longer playing the part she had written for me. Mia looked up again, still chewing. "God, you're so dramatic." It was just a joke. Her voice was dripping with the kind of boredom teenagers use to signal that they've completely checked out. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I kept it under control. There was no use in shouting. The message had been sent. It was time for action. "You don't get to treat me like a joke and then live on my dime," I said to Mia, my voice steady. "Those days are over." Mia stood up, bowl still in hand. "You think I want your money? Please, keep it. I don't need you for anything." I gave a single nod. "Perfect. Then you won't mind leaving again. Today." Elena stepped between us. "She is not leaving. If you think you are going to bully my daughter out of her own house—" "I'm not bullying anyone," I interrupted. "I'm setting a boundary. And if you're not willing to respect that, then perhaps you should pack a bag as well." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It grew heavier, thicker, as if the unvarnished truth had finally entered the space and no one knew how to breathe around it. Elena stared at me, speechless. For a moment, I think she truly believed I didn't mean it, but I did. I meant every single word. I walked past both of them, retrieved my phone from the kitchen counter, and stepped out onto the back patio. I didn't even need to call my lawyer again. We had already reviewed the prenuptial agreement months ago when I first saw the writing on the wall. He was just waiting for the signal. And I gave it to him, standing barefoot on my own patio while my marriage disintegrated inside. I stayed outside for nearly an hour, long enough to feel the sun on my skin, long enough to hear the muffled sounds of Elena pacing upstairs, Mia slamming a door, and something shattering on the tile floor. But I didn't go back in until the house was quiet. I needed that silence. I needed a moment to process what I had just set in motion. When I finally stepped back inside, Elena was in the dining room, her head in her hands. She looked up as I walked by and whispered, "You actually called him?" "I did," she shook her head slowly. "You're destroying everything over one argument." "No," I corrected. "I'm walking away from years of disrespect. That argument just reminded me that I deserve better." I went upstairs, packed a small duffel bag, and booked a hotel room downtown. I couldn't stay in that house with them any longer. It didn't feel like my home. It hadn't in a very long time, and now I understood why. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening for any sign of life, but there was only a still, familiar silence. I walked out, locked the door behind me, and didn't look back. At the hotel, I lay fully dressed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My ring was still on the dresser at home, and I didn't miss its weight on my finger. I ordered a drink from room service and let it sit untouched on the nightstand. My phone buzzed with texts, Elena asking to talk, Mia sending cryptic one-word messages like, "Seriously?" and "Wow." I didn't answer. I blocked both of their numbers for the night. I needed the silence more than anything. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years, not because I was happy or felt vindicated, but because for the first time, I knew I had finally stood up for myself. I had drawn a line, and I was prepared to watch my entire world burn down if it meant I never had to cross it again. The thing about conflict, real conflict, is that no one emerges unscathed. Even when you are right, even when you have drawn your boundaries with absolute clarity, the fallout leaves wounds in places you didn't know were vulnerable. I checked out of the hotel 3 days after I had checked in, not because I was ready to go back, but because the hotel was starting to feel more like a holding cell than a sanctuary. The sterile decor, the forced smiles from the staff, the chemical smell of the linens, it all reminded me that I was in limbo, not liberated. So I went home, not to reconcile or concede, I went back because it was my house, and I would not allow two ungrateful people to hold it captive. When I walked in, I was braced for a confrontation, packed bags, raised voices, Elena pleading with me to reconsider, Mia launching more insults from behind her phone. But the house was eerily silent. The lights were off, the blinds were drawn. It was the kind of quiet that means people have either surrendered or are planning their next attack. I found Elena in the kitchen, sipping wine at 10 in the morning as if it were coffee. She didn't look up when I came in. "Your lawyer called me," she said, her voice flat and brittle. I remained silent. She took another sip. "So that's it? 15 years together, and you're just done?" I let the question linger in the air. 15 years. That's what she said. But I remembered 10 of those years being defined by me walking on eggshells, trying not to disturb the delicate balance she maintained between being a mother and avoiding conflict. I finally answered, my voice slow and steady. "I'm not done. I'm finally beginning. She slammed the glass down, wine sloshing over the rim. You're punishing me for her behavior. I shook my head. No, I'm holding you accountable for enabling it. You allowed her to disrespect me for years. You made excuses, dismissed my feelings, and told me I was being too sensitive. You chose ease over integrity, and now you're surprised that I refuse to carry that weight anymore. She stood up abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger. You knew what you were getting into when you married me. I was a mother first. I know, I nodded, and I respected that. I never asked you to choose between us, but the moment you brought her back into this house after what she said, you made your choice. The rest of the day unfolded in slow motion. There was no shouting, no crying. Just two people navigating the wreckage of what was once a marriage. Mia never left her room. I knew she was in the house because the Wi-Fi activity log showed her device had been connected all day. That, and I could hear muffled music coming from behind her door, the kind of passive-aggressive volume meant to signal that she was unbothered, that she was winning. But winning what? That was the question I kept asking myself. What game did she think this was? And what was the prize? A house? Money? The satisfaction of seeing someone who tried to care for her finally break? A few days later, the divorce papers were officially served. Elena didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She looked at the envelope as if it were an overdue utility bill. But I knew better. Her silence wasn't a sign of strength. It was surrender. Deep down, she knew I was serious. The prenup was ironclad. My lawyer had made sure of it before we were even engaged. At the time, Elna had called it unromantic, but I had insisted it was just about clarity. I had built my life before she came into it, and I wasn't going to risk it all for a romance that might not last. She had signed it, albeit reluctantly. Now, that document was the only thing protecting me from losing everything to people who treated me like an ATM. The fallout came faster than I had anticipated. Friends, neighbors, and mutual acquaintances all had their opinions. Some sent private messages of support, saying things like, "I always thought Mia was a bit much," or, "Honestly, good for you." Others took Elena's side, at least publicly. Her sister posted a vague status on social media about men who abandon their families and fake father figures. I didn't engage. The people who truly knew me already understood. They had seen the way Mia spoke to me at gatherings and how Elena would just laugh it off, saying, "Oh, she's just being dramatic." No one had ever stepped in. No one had ever defended me. Now, suddenly, everyone had something to say. It was my neighbor, Marcus, a retired firefighter who lived next door, who gave me the most honest take. I had been out trimming the hedges, needing a distraction from the tense atmosphere inside, when he brought over a couple of cold beers. "Heard about what's going on," he said. I braced myself for judgment, but he just shrugged. "You're not wrong. You know, some people mistake kindness for weakness, but finally pulling the plug, that takes guts." We sat on the porch steps in a comfortable silence for a while, sipping our beers as the sun began to set. Then he added, "Took me 2 divorces to learn that lesson. One day, you just wake up and realize your own peace is more valuable than being liked." I didn't reply, but his words resonated deeply within me. Back inside, Elena had started packing, quietly and methodically. No theatrics. She knew the terms. The prenup gave her 30 days to vacate after filing, and she wasn't going to contest it. Mia, however, hadn't packed a single box. She continued to walk around the house as if none of this applied to her. When I asked if she had made other living arrangements, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "You seriously think I'm leaving?" I didn't answer. I just walked away. She was about to learn the hard difference between teenage defiance and adult reality. The moment Elena was gone, she would be too. No lease, no rights, no more tolerance. What shocked me most wasn't the disrespect. It was the complete and utter lack of self-awareness. Neither of them had taken a single moment for introspection. There was no apology, no attempt at conversation, just indignation and entitlement. Elena had once told me that Mia would eventually grow out of her attitude, but instead of outgrowing it, she had been coddled by it, nurtured by excuses, and shielded from accountability. And now that shield was cracking, she just hadn't realized it yet. By the end of the week, movers had been scheduled. Elena asked if I would be willing to talk one last time before she left. I agreed. We sat on the porch like 2 strangers, watching a storm roll in from the west. She turned to me and said, "You know, I don't hate you." I nodded. "I don't hate you either." She looked down at her hands. "I just thought, if we held on long enough, things would eventually smooth over." I sighed. They didn't. And they won't. Because smoothing things over isn't healing. It's just hiding. She didn't argue. We watched the rain begin to fall in heavy sheets, and for a moment there was a sense of peace. But peace, as I had learned, came with a price, and I was finally willing to pay it. There's a strange quality to walking through a house that was once full of life, only to find it devoid of energy. The air itself feels heavier. Every room has an echo. You begin to notice how much space a presence takes up, even a toxic one. Elena had moved out 2 days prior. The last box was loaded into a moving truck her brother had rented. He barely made eye contact with me. I hadn't expected a farewell from her, and I didn't receive one. Mia, however, was a different matter. She hadn't left with her mother. She remained as if through sheer force of will she could reverse reality. I gave her 72 hours. I told her in a flat, unemotional tone, "You are not staying here. Pack what you want. Anything left after 3 days will be thrown out." She called me a monster. I called it setting a boundary. But in the quiet moments that followed, when the front door finally clicked shut and I was truly, completely alone, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel liberated. I felt a profound sense of weight, not from regret, that ship had sailed, but from memories, the old kind, the ones that ambush you when the anger subsides and all that remains is a series of what-ifs. I remembered Mia at 13, standing in my home office doorway, holding a sketch she had worked on for weeks. It was for a local art contest, and she looked both proud and nervous. "Is it any good?" she had mumbled, and I sat with her for hours, helping her with the framing and the artist's statement. She resisted my input at every turn, but she kept coming back, every evening, until the project was perfect. She never thanked me, but I didn't do it for that. There was the time she wanted to go to a music festival. Her dad had promised to buy her the tickets, and, predictably, he flaked. She didn't cry, just shrugged with a familiar air of disappointment. I spent the next morning scouring resale sites, found 2 tickets 3 states away, and paid an exorbitant price for them. When I got home and handed them to her, she didn't even make eye contact. She just said, "You didn't have to do that." But I did, because I wanted her to know what it felt like for someone to keep their word. That night, I told Elena I wasn't trying to buy Mia's affection. I just didn't want her to feel let down again. Elena kissed my cheek and said, "She'll come around." But she never did. One afternoon, when she was 16, I found her crying in the backyard. I didn't press her for details. I just sat on the steps next to her. After a few minutes, she mumbled that a boy she liked had called her art weird and pretentious. She seemed so small at that moment, so utterly vulnerable. I told her that she was brilliant, talented, and far too interesting for small-minded people. She didn't reply, but she stopped crying. That was the pattern. I was always there for the aftermath, the cleanup, the emotional support. I was the one who held the safety net when she fell. But that never translated into respect, or even basic acknowledgement. I slowly began to realize that she didn't want a safety net. She wanted someone to blame for the fall, and when I refused to play that role any longer, I became the enemy. I kept thinking back to a night, maybe 2 years ago, when Elena and I argued about Mia's attitude. I gently asked her not to speak to me with such contempt during dinner. Elena had brushed it aside. "She's just being expressive," she'd said. "She's testing boundaries." I told her I was tired of being the only one with boundaries. Elena became defensive, telling me I didn't understand what it was like to raise a teenage girl. But I wasn't trying to raise her. I was just trying to coexist peacefully, to be a steady presence, the way a decent person should be. But I never had a partner in that effort. Elena was always the mediator, never the enforcer, and that was the beginning of the end. When I finally entered Mia's room to clear it out, the scent hit me first. Lavender, acrylic paint, and a hint of expensive perfume. It was like stepping into a memory. Her art was still pinned to the walls, though the corners were curling. A pile of clothes lay on a chair, as if she had started to pack but then given up. On her desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. My stomach clenched. I sat on the edge of her bed, opened it, and unfolded a letter written in her dramatic, artistic handwriting. It wasn't an apology. Of course not. It was a guilt trip. 3 pages of carefully crafted emotional blackmail. She accused me of never really loving her, of only doing things to look like a good guy, of making her feel like a guest in her own home. You were always trying to build a portfolio of good deeds, she wrote, not a family. That line stung. Not because it was true, but because it was so profoundly untrue that it felt like a betrayal. Every sacrifice, every small gesture, I hadn't done any of it for show. I did it because I believed that love wasn't about words. It was about consistency, reliability, action. But I suppose none of that matters if the person you're doing it for is determined not to see it. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't even keep it. I folded it, put it back in the envelope, walked over to the metal trash can on the patio, and lit a match. It burned quickly, the sharp words curling into ash. I stood there and watched until the last ember faded, and I felt lighter. Not forgiven, just clear. She had stated her truth, and I no longer had any obligation to carry it. Later that night, I received a message from one of Elena's cousins, someone I barely knew. She wrote, "I know you're going through a lot. I just wanted to say that I always saw you as a good man. Mia and Elena took that for granted. I'm sorry you were caught in the middle of it." It was a small gesture, but it meant more than I could express, because sometimes all you need is for one other person to say, "I saw it too." It took me almost a week to be able to walk through the entire house without pausing in a doorway, wondering what used to be there, what energy, what echo, what version of myself. There was a time when this house felt too big for one person. Now, it felt just right. Every room had a quietness that wasn't lonely. It was earned. I moved through my days slowly, like someone recovering from a long illness. No TV blared from the living room. No defiant footsteps stomped up the stairs. No doors slammed to punctuate unfinished conversations. Just peace. A heavy, sacred peace that had cost me nearly everything I thought I was building, but had given me back something far more valuable. Myself. The first morning I was truly alone. I made coffee in silence and stood barefoot on the cool kitchen tiles, looking out at the yard. I saw the raised garden beds I had built one spring when Mia had a fleeting interest in growing her own herbs. She used them for one season, but I never tore them down. For years I had thought, maybe one day, she'll see what I was trying to give her. That fantasy dissolved the moment I read her letter. And when I finally took a sledgehammer to those rotting wooden planks, I didn't feel sad. I felt a sense of release. I was dismantling a monument to a one-sided effort. A few days later, I donated 3 large boxes of her old belongings to a local charity. Art supplies she never used, clothes she'd outgrown, books she'd never read. I kept one thing, a small framed photo of the 3 of us on a trip to the mountains. Elena had made us pose for it. Mia looked annoyed, but the mountain light caught her hair perfectly, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on her face. I kept it not because I missed that time, but to remind myself that I had tried, that I had truly, sincerely tried, that I didn't walk away lightly. I walked away after every chance had been given and exhausted. I changed the locks, not just for legal reasons, but for the ritual of it. I needed to hear the click of the new tumblers falling into place, to know that this space, this sanctuary, was now mine alone. No more shared decisions, no more seeking approval that never came. It was a strange feeling, standing at my own front door with a new set of keys, like a man who was finally home, even though he had never left. I slept better that week than I had in a decade. My dreams were quiet. No voices, no arguments, just silence. And the low hum of an air conditioner that no longer had to compete with household drama. Then, just as a new rhythm began to settle in, I received a message request on social media from Mia. Her profile picture was recent. She looked older, more polished, but the defiant smirk was the same. Her message was short. "Hope you're happy. You ruined everything." That was it. No greeting, no preamble. Just one last jab from someone who couldn't admit she had pushed too far. I didn't block her immediately. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, I began to type a reply. I didn't ruin anything. I simply walked away from being disrespected. If that ruined your fantasy of unconditional support with zero accountability, then maybe it was time for it to be ruined. My thumb hovered over the send button. Then I deleted the entire message. I didn't need to say anything. My silence would be my answer. Instead, I went to the living room, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and sat by the large window overlooking the city lights. I watched the cars move below, thinking about everything I had lost, the family I had tried to build, the partner I had believed in, the stepdaughter I had hoped would one day see me. But in that same moment, I recognized what I had gained, the strength to say, enough, the clarity to know when kindness is being mistaken for weakness, and the courage to walk away with my dignity intact. A week later, I was invited to a neighborhood potluck. I almost declined. I didn't want the sympathetic looks, the whispered questions, the awkwardness. But I went anyway, because I needed to re-enter the world as just me, not as a husband, not as a stepfather, not as a scapegoat. Just Alex. And to my surprise, people noticed the change. One friend pulled me aside and said, "You look lighter, like a weight has been lifted." I smiled. It has. We talked, we laughed, we played cards. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain or defend myself. Later that night, I came home, took off my shoes, and stood in the entryway. That silence, the same silence that had once felt so oppressive, now felt like a song, a hymn to my own hard-won freedom. I didn't need noise to fill the space. I didn't need other people to make it feel like a home. I needed respect. I needed boundaries. I needed peace. And now I had all three. They say family is forever. But I've learned that's only true when respect is the foundation. Love without respect is just a form of manipulation. Sacrifice without acknowledgement is a type of servitude. I walked away not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about myself. I will never regret what I gave, but I will never again apologize for choosing peace over performance.